Learning to paint watercolor for me was sometimes an extremely frustrating and disheartening experience. It took a long time to figure out, and there was a lot of heartache and struggle and frustration, and there were many times when I almost completely gave up on it. I would be watching these masters paint these scenes so effortlessly and with so much emotion and vibrancy. And my paintings just were not turning out that way, and I couldn't figure out why. I didn't know what I was doing wrong. My name is Jacob. I'm a self taught watercolorist, and there's a few tricks I've learned along the way that have completely transformed the way I paint and the results that I'm getting. So if you're frustrated in your own watercolor journey, or you feel intimidated or overwhelmed by the medium, I'm here to help. Today I'm going to show you an exercise that is going to help you practice painting in a more fluid way, in a way that allows the water to effectively paint itself so that you're not fighting against it constantly. And then I'm going to show you how I apply that technique in an actual painting. So I hope you stick around. But before we get into that, I want you to let me know in the comments, what are some of your biggest frustrations and challenges that you're facing in your own watercolor journey? And then we'll talk about it. Okay, let's get into the exercise. Okay, so I've got my block here. This is a Kilimanjaro 9x12 block, 140 pounds, cold pressed. It's a very good block. I enjoy painting on it. I do all of my value studies on this type of block. And what we're going to do first, so I'm going to paint one shape over here, and then I'm going to paint it again on the right side of the paper. So paint the first shape in Payne's gray or whatever monochrome color you want to use. I do encourage you to try this at home, by the way. So just get a little puddle of that on my palette here. And just make it whatever kind of shape I want. That'll work just fine. Rinse off my brush. Clean off that palette. Now I'm going to paint the same shape again, but I'm going to paint it using 3 colors. So what I'm going to do is mix those 3 colors on my palette ahead of time, and I will explain why I do that in a minute. So let's start with lavender. Mix up a little puddle of lavender. It helps to use relatively fresh paint when you're doing this, and when you're painting in general. And if your paint has dried out a little bit, you can just spray it down with a spray bottle and that will reactivate it to a certain extent. If it's super dry, you'll just have to squeeze out more paint. So, I'm gonna rinse the brush off. Let's do orange. Mix up a little puddle of orange. That's good for the orange. Rinse off the brush. Now let's do burnt umber. Just mix up a little puddle of burnt umber. All right, so we got our 3 colors. And I'm going to paint this same shape again using these 3 colors. And you'll see what I mean here in just a minute. So start with our lavender. Start dropping that in. You can use whatever 3 colors you want. Okay, rinse off the brush, and now we're going to switch to our orange. And we're going to try to continue this shape in one smooth go. So get into that orange, touch into where we left off in the lavender, let the paint flow together a little bit, and continue the shape down. Okay. Rinse off the brush again, and now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to dip into that burnt umber. One smooth motion. Continue this shape down, touch into the area we just painted, and then keep going. All right. Okay. And there you have it. That's the exercise. That's all there is to it. So essentially what we are practicing doing here is going from our value study to our middle value shape, right? Because when we go to paint our scene, our middle value shape is going to have a bunch of different colors in it that are happening. And what we want is for there to be smooth transitions between each of those colors within the scene. They're all part of that one big shape, right? It's still one big shape, but we want these really beautiful small gradients where the colors mix into each other on the paper. And let me zoom in real quick so you can get a better look at what I'm talking about. So you can see here in the transitions between the different colors how there's a gradient happening. That's because the colors are flowing into each other, because the edge of one color was still wet when I painted the lavender, the edge was wet, and then I tapped into that edge with the orange. And because both of these washes were wet, they're going to flow into each other. And the same thing happened here with the brown, with the burnt umber and the orange. So we can create all these little areas of blending and transition that happen within this big shape. And if we zoom out a little bit, you can see that the edge of this shape has a very hard line, a very, very hard edge. And then within this big shape that has a hard edge, we've got these very smooth areas where the water is flowing and blending on the paper. And this is the magic of watercolor, is we've got this contrast between the very sharp edges and these very smooth areas where the paint is flowing and blending itself on the paper. Now let me show you one more thing here. This is why I had 3 puddles mixed ahead of time. That was so that I could continue this wash in one smooth motion without having to worry about mixing colors. Because what happens if you let an edge dry, like this edge, well, I guess any of these edges are dry now. If I take a different color and I try to paint over it, if I was trying to get this effect at this point, it would not be possible, and here's why. See that? See how there's a razor sharp line at the edge of that where I just painted? It's because the paint is now too dry to mix itself on the paper. You have to understand how dry or wet your paper is for this to work. So I hope you do try this at home, and if you do, let me know how it goes. So now we're going to get into painting an actual scene using this concept. So let's get into that. But before we do, if you enjoy videos like this, please do subscribe and like this video. It helps me out a lot. I really appreciate it. Okay, here's the scene that I'm going to be painting. It's a nice rural scene from the Prescott Valley area north of Phoenix. So we got this field, got these trees with a house, and then you've got background hill, and then you got a pretty simple sky. So very simple, just how I like it. And we can see here in the value study how I've broke everything down. So there's the big middle value shape, is essentially just where the trees are. And then we've got this white roof, which I've painted around because I want this to really pop out. And then there's just a few things on the hill in the background. Okay, I've got my paper all ready. So I'm gonna do the first wash real quick, and then we're gonna jump to the second wash. So this is the first wash. It's still very wet. I need to let this dry out completely, and then we're gonna start the second wash. And this is where we'll see how that exercise that I showed you comes into play. So let me let this dry, and I'll be right back. All right, that first wash is dry enough. And see, we can see right here where I've painted the shadow sides of this house, how that color is blooming out into the surrounding areas, and it's making this really cool kind of soft, fuzzy gradient. That's exactly what I want. I want to have that happen in the first wash, because when I paint over it, that's going to show through from underneath, and it's going to create this really interesting effect. So now I'm looking at my value study, and I see where the big middle value shape is going to be. And I've mixed up a few different kinds of green on my palette. Most of this shape is going to involve different shades of green, and then we've got the shadows in this house, and then the cast shadows on the ground. So let me actually mix up a few colors for those shadows here. Don't need to go too dark. It's only the second wash. Remember, we have a third wash to do after this, which is adding the darks. So just mixing up some cool shadowy colors. Okay. So let's start painting in these trees. Near the top of the canopy, I'm going to break the shape up a little bit to kind of give the impression of some of those individual leaves without actually painting every single leaf. I'd be here for the rest of the night if I tried to do that, and I don't want to do that. I'd rather paint the idea of leaves than actual leaves. Paint right over the top of that white roof so we can preserve that nice highlight. We'll throw some burnt sienna into there just to change up the green a little bit. You don't want your greens to look too monotonous. It's nice to add different colors in there occasionally. And as long as the edge that we're painting into is still wet, we're good to go. So I'm constantly just paying attention and seeing how my edges are drying, how fast they're drying. And the more you paint, you'll get a better idea of how fast things dry and how much time you still have to work on things. All right, so there's some grass on the ground that's also going to be included in this big middle value shape. Let me drop that in here. It goes right up to the base of this house. It's all one big shape. I'm painting this shape again, but in color, just like that exercise that we did. And I'm letting all these little transitions and gradients happen within this big shape. Just painting with the tip of my brush, getting those nice finer lines going for the grass. Just adding slight variations to the kind of green that I'm putting down, changing it up here and there, making it warmer here, cooler there. See how all these different colors are just flowing together within this big shape. And I'm rinsing my brush whenever I go to pick up a different color from my palette. Start dropping in some of these cast shadows before our edges dry up. There's one right there. So again, touching into the area that we've already painted so that it flows together as one shape. Darken up this side of the house, which is in shadow. Maybe push that a little more. Make that a little darker. Paint around that little highlight right there. Continue around to the other side of the house. Touch into that grass area. It's all one big shape. All the middle value is forming one big shape. We'll start darkening up some of the actual tree line as well while it's still damp, giving us these nice little soft edges in here. And we can really make that bright roof pop by darkening the areas just around it. Sometimes I like to take my finger and smudge the edge of the tree line, just make it a little more indefined and fuzzy and indistinct. I don't know if indefined is a word, but we're gonna go with it. All right, let's add some of those shrubs at the top of the hill in the background. Connect that into the top of the tree line in the foreground. I really like how these bushes define the top of the hill. It really gives a sense of scale and perspective in this scene. And this technically isn't a completely connected shape. There's a few areas where the shape is broken, but it's implied that there's a connection, that it's part of the same shape. And some of the bushes pop over top of the ridge line. Okay, and we'll just add a little texture to the field in the foreground. I got my brush laid out here. I'm just kind of lightly brushing it over the paper. This is called dry brushing. You're letting the brush kind of skip over the surface of the paper. And this is a lot more effective if your paper has a little bit of texture to it, which mine does. Now you want to do that only when the paint underneath is completely dry. If you try to do this, if the paint underneath is wet even a little bit, you'll pick up some of that paint from underneath and it will become muddy and messy, and you won't be happy with it. Okay, so if we get our value study out again, that's the middle value shape done. That's all there is to it. And within that middle value shape, you can see a few areas that are going to be dark, mostly within the tree line, and then the windows on the house, and then there's some trunks and branches and things in the trees that we're going to further define. And we'll get out a smaller brush for this. So we'll drop in those windows, make sure that that's dry. I'm not trying to make these perfect rectangles, I'm just getting pretty close. Some tree trunks and stuff happening right here. This is where we can really have some fun with smaller details, but we can't get too carried away. Gotta use our dark sparingly. Darken up some areas of the tree line. Just pushing that texture a little more. This is where things start to take on a really three-dimensional look. Drop in a little tree trunk right there, maybe a second one. Drop in one right there too, what the heck. In fact, let's see. Yep, so we're going to scratch out a few lighter branches and tree trunks here and there, just representing areas where the light is hitting the branches directly. Just a few. There's a little fence that runs along the edge of the property that I'm going to be dropping in as we go. I'm going to darken up that cast shadow just a bit also. A few branches poking up over the top of the tree line. These really tiny details just do so much to add to the realism of this scene. Darken up that shadow underneath the tree line a little more. Just dropping in some trunks here and there. Using the side of my brush to add some nice texture, some leafy texture, letting the brush kind of skip along the surface. It's basically dry brushing is what I'm doing. Trying to vary my brush strokes and not do the same motion every time. That will make it look stiff and unnatural if I do that. If a color's a little too intense, I'm just taking my finger and kind of smoothing it over. Don't be afraid to use your fingers. I'm just going to drop in that fence line here. Just really small, quick vertical strokes. I think that's kind of a fun little detail that really brings it all together. Add in a few more trunks and branches here and there. There's some small details on the roof that I want to add in with a very light mixture here. There's some really subtle lines going across the roof that I like. Probably a corrugated metal roof, if I had to guess. Just these little tiny details that make all the difference. All right, so we're going to call that a finished painting. So I hope you see how that exercise applied in the painting, where we were painting one big shape, which was the middle value, and then within that shape we were able to effortlessly switch between different colors as we painted it, and that created all these really beautiful gradients that you see within the shape. So if you made it this far, thank you very much for watching. I really truly appreciate it. I hope you subscribe, and I hope to see you on the next one.